just checking out the blog. Like I said, the lecture notes, so the lecture slides, you can download them from here. There's a link there, and I'll put a link over in there. So if you go to introduction, you should be able to download. There we go. There's just the Monday's slides. And today's slides are there, intro to Unity. Although there's not a lot in today's slides because it'll mostly kind of be me demoing stuff in Unity. But as I add more slides, I will put them all up in there for you to download. Hopefully they'll be available sometime before the lecture in order for you to, if you're one of those kind of person who wants to print out the slides and bring them to lecture to scribble on, you can do that. They do change a little bit from time to time. Come in. It's all right, no worries. But yeah, keep your eye on that directory. I'll add a link over here so that you can get to it. I'll do that later today. And as I said, I don't know if I think I told you about there's the wiki, the class wiki. Like I said, you don't have access to this at the moment, but hopefully after this week's lab you should all be able to have access to the wiki, and then you can start putting stuff on there and editing stuff, and it'll be fine. And so labs start today. If you're in the Wednesday lab after this class, it starts today. If you're, and we'll, like I said before, we'll be cycling through the labs from Wednesday to Monday because they scheduled the first lab before the first lecture, which is a bit weird. So it'll go, so if you're in Monday's class, you'll be doing the labs from the previous week because the next week's labs will contain stuff that you don't know how to do yet. And like I said, the labs are probably the most important part of the subject, so make sure you come and look at the labs. This week's lab, just for the sake of it, we'll be looking at, you'll be writing your very first program. You'll all get, which you can look at later, you'll all be getting a computer science account on our machines. We have our own account system for the computer science machines, at least for the time being, until they centralize all the IT. So you'll need to activate that account, and we'll go through the steps of doing that in your lab. But you have to activate that, and you have to sign some things saying you're not going to use it for, file sharing or downloading enormous amounts of porn or anything like that. And then we'll do some playing around with Unity in today's lab and get you familiar with it. You probably want to take some time as well, if you can, to have a look at the Design 3 courseware. Hi guys, come in. There's particularly, if you go to the Unity Fundamentals, hopefully eventually it'll load. Do a little dance. Oh, there we go. So, Chapter 2 on the interface and tools, that's a free one. You can get that even if you haven't bought a subscription. You should probably go and look through that, because I'll be going over the interface today for Unity, but that gives you a little bit more reference on how it works and what to do, how to do things with it. It's also all in the Unity manuals, which are online, so I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But that's a nice introduction to how to use Unity. Like I said before, Unity does a lot of stuff that we won't be covering in this course. Unity can do really interesting things with lighting and with cameras and with particle systems. And if you want to make something that really shines, you want to learn how to do those things. But the essence of this course is not really how to make a pretty scene. It's about how to do programming. So we won't be spending too much time working on those things. I think I will. Planning to show you a little bit around the physics system in Unity, because it's an interesting thing to play with, but I won't be going through all the features of Unity, so that's for you to experiment with, and there are plenty of online tutorials and stuff for you to learn about all that stuff. Okay, so let's get into over here. Let's look at this. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through creating some stuff in Unity, and and some of the important tools that we're going to want to look at. So let's actually skip out of that. Come down here. So this is, I said, when you download Unity, it automatically opens this example scene as the first thing that you see, which is kind of annoying after a while. Unity is designed to automatically open the last project you were working on, which is all right if you're working on one project a lot, because it means it automatically opens it. It's really annoying if, like me, you actually work on several different projects and it takes all its time to load the project that you don't want, and then you have to tell it to load the project you do want. So for starters, you might be interested in coming over here, looking at the preferences. And there's an option here in the preferences, and if I can remember how to do this, there we go. Ooh, there we go. So there's an option here, I think, Show Project Wizard at Startup, which if you click that on, when you start the program, rather than loading the last thing, it'll prompt you, do you want to create a new project, or do you want to open an existing project? So that, if you're working on the same project all the time, you'd probably leave that turned off, so it just reloads the same project. If you're working on different projects, then you probably want to turn that on, so you always have the option of choosing which project you want to go to. The file management in Unity is a little bit annoying, but the problem is because it's trying to be cross-platform. It does things sometimes like the way Windows does things, and sometimes it does things like the way Mac does things, and sometimes it does things in some weird compromise. And so, it doesn't really always work the way you expect it to work, which is slightly annoying, but you can live with that. So if you want to, so the first thing you need to know how to do is to make a new project. Very easy, down to, so there's a distinction between projects and scenes. A project is the whole of a game or whatever it is that you're building. The scenes are then individual scenes within that game. So normally, if you're making a whole new project, you come down here, New Project, and this will be the project wizard that'll pop up if you turn that option on. Otherwise, you have to do this. You select a destination for where you want to save your project. If you press the settings, you can choose. I'm going to create a new project in my Unity folder. I'm going to call it, I don't know, what will we call it? Project, example project. And we click Save. And so it puts the name in there. We have some options here for the packages that Unity is going to use. These are extra features that you can use within Unity. So they provide you with a bunch of assets that you might want to use. We're not going to use any of those just yet, so we can actually come here and just turn those off. You'll probably, if you just get the free version, you'll probably only have the option of the standard assets package. If you fork out some money and get the pro version, you'll get the pro assets and the toon shading assets, which are kind of cool if you want to do, especially if you want to do something toon shaded, which is kind of nice. But we don't need those for the time being, so we can just say no. And we come down here and we click Create Project. And this is where it takes a bit of time. Just scroll back out again. Okay, that's giving us the game scene. Why do we want the game scene? We don't. So let's go to Layouts, say wide. There we go. Okay, so there are a bunch of different, I'm not sure what they call them, windows, a bunch of different windows within Unity. This is the scene window, which is where you can see all the objects that you have in your world. It's a bit hard to see it there, but in the window I've got in front of me, there's actually you can see a big plane with cross lines in it, so you can work out where things are located. Over to the right-hand side here, we have the inspector. This will show us details about objects in our scene. Down at the bottom, we have the hierarchy, which shows us the objects that are there. At the moment, we have only one object in our hierarchy. If we come down, let me just see if I can do this. Yeah, we have only one object down here in our hierarchy, which is the main camera. And if we have a look up here in the scene, that's the main camera there. It's not doing anything very interesting at the moment because there's nothing to look at. And over here in our project window, we have, these are the objects that we're going to be creating and using in our scene. So I'll show you what that means. Let's create an object. Come up to the top here. If we click on game object, we can create an empty object which just has nothing associated with it, but that's not really interesting at the moment. Or we can create an other. We have a bunch of options for different things we can create. What we'll create right now is a cube. And there it is. We have now a cube in our world. It's very pretty. We zoom in on it. We can see that it has, it's a bit hard to see in the light, but it has 3 arrows attached to it, by which if we grab one arrow we can move it around. It's a bit tricky to do that while zoomed in. We grab it, we can move it backwards and forwards that way. We can move it up and down, and we can move it that way. So we have a bunch of different tools that we can use here. The one that we've got selected now is the move tool. That looks like that. That allows us to move. Let me scroll in on that for the camera. That's the move tool. Lets us move objects around. This is the rotate tool. If we select the rotate tool and we come down here, and we've changed, the arrows go away and we've got this funny looking sphere thing. If we grab it now, let's see if I can do this. I can't, it's hard to do that while I'm zoomed in, so we'll just have to do it zoomed out. If I grab a handle here, I can rotate my cube around. Lovely. And we also have the fourth tool here is the scale tool. Again, this puts a different set of handles on the cube. And if we grab something with the scale tool, we can make it bigger or smaller in each of the 3 directions. So there we go. We can stretch our cube like that, so it's no longer a cube. So, and then the hand tool just allows us to move around the environment. So this allows us to look at things in different ways. If I press one of these keys, which I can remember, the Option key, and then see the hand tool turns into the eye tool, that rotates the camera. So now if I drag around, I can see my cube from different directions. And I think there's also a way of, if I press the Command key, I get the magnifying glass, which lets me zoom in and out, and so I can see it from different distances. So this is just for us in editing the scene. There's also this little doohickey over here which tells us which way is up in our scene. So as I go back and rotate it around, you see that little doohickey rotates with me. There are 3 axes here, the X, Y and Z. X is always left and right, Y is up and down, and Z is in and out from the screen in the usual arrangement. But of course we can rearrange the camera to point in whatever direction we like. We can also use this as a reference. If we press Y, it'll instantly rotate the camera so that we're looking down. If we press X, it'll instantly rotate the camera so we're looking from one side, from the right in this case, and if we press Z, it'll look from the front. And we can actually rotate all the way around, so we can go from front to left to back to right and keep rotating around in whatever direction we want. It's kind of handy sometimes to look at your scene from different directions. If we want to go back to the free view that we had before, we click on the middle and it goes back to a free view of our box. So let's and so the other thing we see is that when we added the cube to the scene, down here in the hierarchy, if I zoom in on that, down here in the hierarchy, an entry called cube has appeared in that scene. So if we go up here and we add, say, it's really hard to do this while it's zoomed in. If we add another cube, there's our other cube. We can select the cube, actually we have to select the move tool. There's our other cube hidden away under there. We can grab it. I can't grab and move while I'm zoomed in, something doesn't work there. Can grab another cube, and we see now there are 2 cubes in the view, in the hierarchy. Now we can actually, if we click on one of those, we can press Enter, and it'll let us edit the name. So if we want, we can call this one, whoops, not like that. We can call this one Cube 1, and we can call that one Cube 2. Cube 2, if I can type. There we go, Cube 2. And I don't know which one's which, so let's zoom out. So that's cube 2 and that's cube 1. So we can select objects in the scene by clicking on them, by selecting the move tool and clicking on them, or we can select objects in the scene by finding them in the hierarchy and clicking on them, and we change between the two objects. And we can, and so we can manipulate things like that. The other thing to notice now is that when we click on one of the cubes, over here in the inspector, a bunch of information pops up. So if I click on cube 1, it tells me some things about cube 1. It tells me that cube 1 is at a certain position in the world. It's at position x 0.4042, y whatever z. It tells me the rotation of the cube, and it tells me the scale of the cube. Now if I come back over here and select cube 2, you see that cube 2 is at a different position. Cube 2, because we rotated it before, cube 2 now has a different rotation, and cube 2, because we stretched it, has a different scale. And if I zoom out and come back here, you can see as I grab the cube and move it, if I can just free move it, there we go. You can see the numbers change as I move it around. So as I move it up and down, the X, Y, and Z position changes. If I rotate it, you can see the rotation numbers change. If I rotate it that way, or if I rotate it that way, or if I rotate it that way, those numbers change. And if I scale it, the scale numbers obviously change. We can also do another thing. We can edit these numbers directly. So if I want to set that scale to 1, I can just type 1 in there. If I want to set the rotation here to 0, 0, 0, I can do that. Whoops. And that sets it back to its normal position. So you can adjust things by hand by moving them around in the scene if you want to tweak something to I, or if you want to set it to a particular value, you can just come over here in the inspector and pick the value you want and set it to that. So that's a really handy way of, if for one side, if you kind of want to make something just fit, or another side, if you want to set it to a particular value, you've got your choice between which way you're going to do it. The thing to note about, so you should, if I just get rid of this cube, I can get rid of something as well by clicking on it and just pressing, I think it's Command backspace on the Mac. I don't know, I think it might be delete on the PC, but you can delete things from the scene. If we come back to this cube, if I put it back at 0, 0, 0, there it is. Now you see that if I adjust the X, so X is that direction, 2, 3, 4. So Y is that way, and Z is that way in this scene. But the other thing to note is that if I type an angle here, and it's an angle in degrees, so if I rotate something by 45 degrees, you see that it rotates around the x-axis. So when the number for x is the x-axis, this x-axis stays the same, and the object rotates around that. So if I rotate it 10 degrees, it rotates 10 degrees around that axis. If I rotate it 10 degrees y, it rotates around the y-axis. So the y-axis keeps pointing up, and it turns in that direction. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes to work out which way a rotation is going to go when you do it. But if you just remember that the x rotation keeps the x pointing in the same direction and rotates the other two, that's what's happening. And obviously, then the scale just works in the way you'd think that if you double the x value, it doubles in size in the x direction. You can scale things down to 0 if you want, which there's a nothing. That's probably not very interesting, but you can do it. So I've just lost my cube. Where did it go? Oh, what? Oh, whatever. So grab my cube back again. There it is. Why has it suddenly gone invisible? I don't know. There are a couple of other things over here in the inspector. If we zoom back over there. You don't really need to know about these at the moment, but this is if you've got, so more complicated models will have a mesh attached to them, which is a way of describing the shape of the model. I'm not going to go into detail about how we construct meshes, but when you download a model off the web, you'll download it in the form of a mesh, and then you'll add that mesh to an object in the world. This one's also got a thing called a box collider on it. That's if you want to have it actually interacting with physics. That's the way it detects when two things collide with one another. You don't have to worry about that too much at the moment. And it's also got a mesh renderer. The mesh renderer is kind of interesting to us, mostly because this is where you say the textures that you want to add to your object. So if we zoom out, we can look at this as the materials. This cube has a bunch of materials attached to it. If we select that material, this is at the moment, I've lost my cube. Why is it invisible? What have I done? I don't know why it's invisible. I'm just going to make another cube so that I don't have to stand here looking stupid. Another cube, there we go. So we take that cube, if we come down here and look at its materials, then if we double click on that, we open up that material, and that's the default material. It's this boring grey look. You can actually make your cube look different by adding extra materials, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit actually, because I'll get to that in a second. But yes, if you want to make your cube different colours or add textures to it to make it look wood grain or like stone or whatever you want, you mess around, you'll add materials there, and that'll enable you to change the look. We'll get to that in a second. Which one of those cubes is that? That's my invisible cube, which I will delete and leave that cube. So now if we go, the other thing in the scene that I lighted over was the camera. There's the camera. It's an object like any other one, so it has a position in the scene. It has a bunch of other components that you might want to have a look at. But the main thing about the camera is if we have a look at the camera from the top here, and we scroll out, you can see which way the camera is looking, right? So the camera at the moment is looking up along the blue line. The camera is what decides what you actually see when you run the program. So you can put all these things in the world, but if the camera is not pointing at them, you won't see anything. So it really is just like an actual video camera in your world, and you can move it around in the scene as you feel like. So when you construct, say, a first-person shooter game, you attach the camera to the player, and then as the player moves around, you move the camera with them, and what they see changes, but you don't have to move things around in the world. So if we have a look at the moment, the camera is pointing in the right direction, so we should be able to see our cube. So if we actually, to run the game, we come up here to the arrow at the top of the screen, and we press play, and there we go. There is our game. Our camera is pointing at our cube. It looks very boring. We've got a blue background, which is rather boring. Nothing's happening, but it's working. Hi, come in. If we want, one of the things that you probably want to add to your scene is we come up here, we can create we probably want to add some light to the scene, because at the moment there's no actual light in order to see anything. So one of the kinds of objects we can create is a point light. There it is. It's now in there. We can move it around. We can place it where we want it in the scene. Let's just make sure it's in the right spot. Okay, and now if we open up the world, now our cube looks slightly different. It's actually lit up. And the nice thing we can do, actually let's do this. Let's open, we change our layout to, I think that one? Yep, okay. So we can view both of these at the same time. If we play our world, then we can actually change things here. And you can see, I don't know if you can see that on that screen, it's a bit tricky, but as I move the light around in the scene, it changes the lighting on the cube in the game. So we probably don't have a good enough view of the screen to be able to see that, but we can actually change things while we're playing. You can use the editor to change things, and if things are happening automatically in our game, hopefully eventually when we program some stuff to happen, we can see it all happening in the scene, and we can actually look over here at the inspector and see how things are changing. We can also change things here. We could select our cube, and while we're playing we can move it around and change numbers, whatever we want. And it all happens in situ. So the nice thing here is about this is that we can edit things on the fly and watch what happens in the real world while they're happening. And we can, when the game is actually running and the cube's doing something interesting, then we can see how it changes in all these different places. I'm going to go back to the layout we had before. Oh, the other thing that you probably want to see is if you control-click on this tab, you get the option to maximize. That gives you a full screen view of your game. So if you actually want to test out your game and play it, often a full screen view is a good way of doing it. If you then, I think you can also do that by, you can also do that by selecting a window and then pressing space, makes it a full screen window. And if I select this window and press space, that one goes full screen. That's a handy little feature. If you're concentrating work in one window, you can make it full screen and do your work in there and then go back again with just a single key press. Right, let me go back to my notes to see where we're meant to be going next. Okay, so like I said, you can, just the same as you can manipulate the cube, I can also move the camera around. If I move the camera closer, I can come in for a close-up on the cube. If I move the camera further away, if I rotate the camera, if I grab the rotation thing, I can rotate the camera and I can see things from different angles. So the camera really is just another object in my world that I can do whatever I like with. Everything that I can do with the cube, I can also do with the camera. And I can undo that. There we go, to put it back where it was. There are also, if we come over to the other side, what we see here, stop doing that. What we see here in the inspector is a bunch of things. Each object has a bunch of these things attached to it. Almost every object will have a transform, almost every object will have a transform component. These are called components. So almost every object will have a transform component which tells you where it is in the world and which way it's pointing and how much it's been stretched. Some objects will have other components. So you saw before that the cube had associated mesh and colliders with it. The camera obviously is not, you're never going to look at it, so the camera doesn't have a mesh associated with it normally. But it does have this camera thing which gives you some of the values about the camera. So for example, you can come here and select the background color. If I change this by, I'm not sure how, let me go back. If I click on this, I think, oh, no, that's not what there it is. Okay, it's just opened it up over there. So if I double click on that and come over here, I can select a pink background color, and now you see in my game scene the background has all gone pink. Which probably is not what we want, but we'll live with it. We can also adjust a bunch of other values. I won't tell you what they mean. They're about this. They're kind of like what kind of lenses you're using on your camera. So you can change the field of view of your camera to be narrower or wider. You can change some things about how far away the camera can see things. The near clip plane and far clip plane, like I won't see anything that's closer than the near or further away than the far. And you can also make your camera orthographic, which kind of, well, it changes the way it works. It's kind of like a lens that looks really straight rather than out. You can play around with that and see what it does. You can probably read more about that elsewhere. I don't know what the GUI layer does. I don't know what the flare layer does. And the audio listener is not very interesting either for the time being. So we won't worry about that. If we look at our light, a light has a transform again because that's where it is, and has a light component associated with it, which tells us what kind of light it is, what color the light is, and then some other aspects about what, the range of the light, whether it has a halo, and various other things. So different objects will have different components associated with them, and all of those components will turn up here in the inspector for you to look at the values and manipulate them. All of the values here will also be things that we'll be able to manipulate in our code. So you may want your light to change dynamically in the scene, as for example, if the light represents the sun in your scene and it changes time of day, we'll be able to make some code later which changes the color of that light as the day progresses. So what we're interested in more is the fact that we can, these are all properties of the light that we can change in the code as well as changing in the editor. If you want to add a new component to something that it doesn't already have, the component menu will let you do that. So there are a bunch of different components here that you can add to things. For example, if you want to make it a physics, you want to make something have physics, you need to add a rigid body component to it. And there are a bunch of other components here that do all manner of different things. One of the ones you might be interested in is you can make an object an audio source. The game has 3D spatialized audio, so if you attach an audio source to an object and then there's an audio listener on the camera, it'll spatialize the audio according to the distance between and the direction between the object and the camera. So that's how, if you remember from yesterday's lecture, there was seagulls flying overhead. Each of those seagulls was its own audio source, which was playing a particular sound. And as they flew around, if you're actually wearing headphones, you'd be able to hear the spatialized sound moving around. Which is kind of nice. I've got a student at the moment doing game design for the blind who's using that spatialized audio to create soundscapes in Unity. So he's not actually he's using basic graphics so that a sighted person can also play the game. But most of the game is actually just in spatialized sound and navigating a space based on the different sounds that come and go as you move through it, which I think is pretty cool. Any other components in there that are important? Not really. You can find out a bit about most of these. We'll talk about them at different times. The other thing to note is that in the hierarchy view, we can attach things to each other. So at the moment, all our three objects, our light, our camera, and our cube are all separate, but we can grab the light and attach it to the camera. And now it becomes part. So now if we have a look, the light becomes a sub-part of the camera. Now if we look, if we zoom out, if I come over here and grab the camera, so there's the camera and there's the light. If I grab the camera, the light moves with the camera. So you can attach things to one another and they'll automatically move together. Now the parent moves the child, so if I grab the child, it doesn't move the parent. Right, so the light doesn't move the camera, but the camera moves the light. So I don't think there's a way that I know of to attach them both so that moving them together works. It's always in a hierarchy. So you take the bottom of the bottommost root part and attach larger parts to it. So if we wanted to, we could create like quite a complicated object out of that by taking a cube, and we could take a sphere and add the sphere. Let's zoom in here. Actually, let's go to the bigger view so you can see that better. Layouts wide. So we can take the sphere and put it, say, there, and then we can, so then if we come down again to our hierarchy and attach the sphere to the cube, then we can grab the cube and move that all up. Then we can create other cylinder, and we can grab our cylinder and put that over there, and then we can create another cylinder and put it over there. And if I went to any bother to actually make this look any good, which this is not the way to do it, but I could make a kind of person thing if I wanted to, and I could call this, I could name each of these appropriately. Call this one leg, left leg, and this one right leg. Whoops, not that one. That one right leg. And then I could attach the right leg to the cube, and I could attach the left leg to the cube, or vice versa, and so on. And I can actually build a complicated hierarchy here. If I wanted to, I could make like the actual leg out of several components and join those components together into a leg, and then add that leg to the torso and so forth in order to make quite a large hierarchy for my body. And then what's nice now is if I move the cube or if, for example, if I rotate the cube, so if I turn the whole thing around 90 degrees, that way the whole body moves, right? Because all those components are attached to the cube. When you actually import objects in from Maya, or objects that you download from the web or from 3D Studio Max, all of which can import into Unity really easily, they will generally have quite complicated hierarchies of how the different parts work. Those hierarchies are designed so that you can treat the whole object as a unit, or you can move individual parts. So if you actually find a decent model of a body, it won't just be one big mesh of a body. It'll be a mesh. It'll probably have the torso as the main part, and then have each of the limbs hanging off that, and each of the limbs will have separate parts for the different things. So then I can move my whole body as one unit, or I can move my whole arm as one unit, or I can just bend my arm at the elbow, and I have different sort of levels at which I can do that transformation. And the nice thing is, if I bend my arm at the elbow and then lift my arm, this part automatically transfers when I do that. If I move my whole body, the arm still stays in position and such. I don't have to move every individual piece, which is really convenient for manipulating these things. We're running short of time, so let me just check in my notes that there's nothing else that I'm forgetting to talk about. So we said the inspector allows us to look at the properties of different things and change them around. Okay, I'll show you how to add a texture. I've done that. Importing models, importing packages, scripts, yes. Okay, so out of this, the most important thing that I need to show you for what we're going to do is adding scripts to things. So at the moment we've done everything by hand in here, but that's not going to create anything very interesting. What we want to actually do is add a script to an object. So I'm going to delete most of this except for the cube, and come back to our favourite cube now, which I've turned upside down, so let's turn it back the right way. Now we can, if we want to add code to this cube to actually make it do something, this is where, in my opinion, it gets interesting. We can, I don't know what I just clicked, we can come down here. If we have a couple of different ways we can do this. We can come up to Assets and click Create, and we've got a bunch of options for assets we can create. We're going to be working in JavaScript, so we're going to be making JavaScript scripts. We can actually program Unity in two other languages, C# and Boo. Unless you've already used either of those languages, I really advise you not to. JavaScript is significantly easier. So if we do that, then down here in the project view, we come down to there we go. Come down to the project view, it creates what's called new behavior script. So the other way, the more convenient way of doing that is to control-click in this window, which pops up a menu, and then go create JavaScript, and it's created another one. We can then, to edit the script, we can double-click on it, which will open up this. This is the, let me move this over to this window. There we go. This is the Unity, it's called Unitron. This is the Unity editor. This is where we'll be editing our code and writing code to make something happen. I won't explain how, but we'll just do a bit of code in here. Transform, let's see if I can remember my syntax. .rotate 0, 1, 0, semicolon. Got to remember the semicolons. So when we've written our script like that, Unitron will automatically highlight some parts of our syntax with different colours. Sometimes it gets it wrong, but usually it sort of highlights the important words there. We've got to save that, so if we come up here and click Save, or alternatively if we Command S, then as soon as we save it, it's imported into Unity. So now if we click on that script, we can see over here in the inspector, there's the script that we've just written, and we can now attach that script to our cube. So we grab the script. The easiest way to do this is actually just to grab the script, drag it over here, and attach it to the cube. If we now look at the cube, one of its components now is the new behavior script that we just wrote. And this tells us, it's a pretty boring name, new behavior script, just tells us what it was. We can actually come down here and change its name to something interesting like rotate. And now if we go back over there, if we go back and select the cube again and go back over into the inspector, we can see it's called rotate over here. So now if we run that, hopefully everything's pointing the right way. There we go, woohoo, rotating cube with a pink background. But that's basically how we do, what we're going to be doing a lot of in here is, we're not rotating cubes, hopefully. Hopefully we'll do something a bit more interesting. But we can add, that's how we add behaviours to things in the world. If we want an object to do something, we'll add a script to it which makes it do it. Now the interesting thing is that we can do, if I come over to here, so let's call that rotate Y, because it's rotating about the Y-axis. If I come over here and edit this other script, and let's make this script called transform.rotate, and let's make it rotate about the X-axis. Actually, let's show you something. If I leave off the semicolon, which is a mistake in the program, then what happens down here, I get, if I zoom in down here, I get, well, not there, there, I get an error message saying that there's a semicolon at the end. So if I make mistakes in my code, what I can do, if I want to see that in more detail, I can come here and open up the console. So the console window, yes, I know I've got a lab on in a minute, okay. The console window will tell us about any mistakes that are in our code. And actually, if we double click on this, it'll take us to the line in our code where the mistake is, which is a really handy way of finding those bugs. If Unity is smart enough to work out where the bug was, sometimes it gets it wrong. So it tells us that we're missing a semicolon, we can add the semicolon, we save again, and come back over here, and after saving, hopefully, it's still complaining. What are you complaining about? Oh, it's now complaining that rotate is not a member of transform. Did I mean capital R rotate? I did. So I made a mistake here that I didn't even mean to make. That should be capital R rotate. It cares about whether or not you're using lower or uppercase. Come back over here. Now there are no errors in our console, so hopefully our code will run. Of course, it doesn't mean it'll actually do what we want it to do. We'll call this one rotate X. And so now we go back to our cube. Excuse me, our cube, and we can grab rotate X. We could dump it on the cube like that, or we could actually move it over here and drop it in the inspector. Does the same thing. Now we have two scripts on that object, and both of those scripts run at the same time. So now the cube is both rotating in its y-axis and rotating in its x-axis, which makes it rotate diagonally. So we can have as many scripts on an object as we want. I'm sure there's some limit, upper limit, but I don't think you'll find it unless you just go out to add script, add script, add script, add script. We can even, if we want, add the same script twice, which will now hopefully make it rotate twice as fast in one direction than in the other, right? And we can add those scripts, the same scripts we can add to the camera, and now we have a rotating camera, which we've just lost everything. And if we come back here and look at the scene, we can see there's our cube rotating, and there's our light rotating because it's attached to the camera. The camera's staying in the same spot, it's just turning around. If we select the camera, there we go. We can see the camera view turning round and round in the world. You can't see that very well on that screen, but trust me, it's turning around and around the world. I know what I'm talking about. The final useful thing before we finish up, so you can stop the scene by pressing play again and it goes back to where it was. You can also pause the scene by clicking on the pause button. Let's come back here so we can see what we're doing. So that just stops it and restarts it. So if we want to, we can do that. We can stop at a certain point and see what's going on over here and then restart it, and so we can do things in the scene. We can also step the scene one frame at a time if we want. So if we pause it and then just press this button repetitively, we just go one frame ahead, which is really handy if your scene's doing something really weird. You can't necessarily catch it at the point, but you can stop it, pause it just before the point you want, and then step it one scene at a time. And you can see what's going on in here, you can see what's going on in the inspector, so you can check out where your code might be going wrong. There are a whole bunch of other things that you can do. There's my keynote. I'm not going to, yeah, I talked about that. Yeah, okay, so the last couple of things you need to know, when you have, let's do that. No, you're not going to do that. Oh, okay, you've done that. So when you've made something that you want to actually, that you finished and you want to actually distribute to other people, you can come to build settings in the file menu. Lets you actually make a distributable version of this. You can save it as a web player, which will give you a file that you can stick on the web, and some HTML to make a web page out of it. You can save it as an a Windows standalone or an OS X standalone of different kinds, depending on what kind of OS X, what kind of Apple you've got. If you we'll talk some more about that later. But you can actually, if you click build, it'll just create it. If you click build and run, then I can click this button and it will actually cube. There you go. And hey presto, it creates my cube game and actually runs it. And then I press the play button and woohoo, there's my spinning pink cube game that I can send to all my friends. So not really exciting, but that's fun. The other thing that you need to know about, which we come back to Keynote, wherever it got to. Okay, getting help on all of this. There is a whole bunch, if we go up to the Unity website, let's come to here, actually let's go back to there and click on down here. There's a bunch of, if you go to the Unity website, under support, there are a bunch of different, so first of all there's a bunch of different documentation which you'll want to look at. There's sort of a basic manual for how to use everything. They explain all the controls and everything in much more detail than I just did. There's tutorials which guide you through building something. There's even video tutorials if you want. There's a reference manual for looking at, which we'll go into more details, particularly the scripting reference will be one that we look at a lot, which tells us all about the scripting side of this thing. The other useful thing is if we come up here to community, there are a whole bunch of websites that are really good. Unity Answers is a great place to post a question that you don't understand how something works. They can give you an answer to. Unity Forums, if you have more of a question that needs discussion or you have just a general, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did something, you can discuss that in the forums. And the Unity, there's a Unity Wiki which has a bunch of standard solutions to common questions and other things. It's a really good community. The developers of Unity are on there and do actively support it, and the people there are very friendly and share help. I've asked several questions there and always got good quality answers. So feel free to use that. Don't use it to say, this is a question from my assignment, can you please write the answer for me so that I can submit it. But do use it if you don't understand how something works and you want to get help. And back here, yeah, so there's the documentation, there's the community forum, there's Unity Answers, and there's the Unity Wiki. And I'll be setting up the class wiki as well, which is another resource for you. Okay, that's about all for today. Thank you very much. So today's lab, yeah, for those of you in my lab, we'll be meeting downstairs. Otherwise, yes, later in the week, we'll be setting up your accounts and messing around a bit with Unity. So see you then.